Part 6. Then I did hear him making a call. "Stacy, track Raina's cell phone delivery and have her courier at the manor when it arrives. Have them take it to the office and message me. I'll pick it up from there." His voice sounded tired, but I didn't look at him. My own heart was aching, and no matter how much this was all my fault, I was wallowing a bit. I'll tell her. How many times has he called?" Jonathan sighed. "All right, I'll give him a call." He hung up without saying goodbye, and then I heard him pushing more buttons. Either he was giving me my space to be kind, or he was more irritated with me than he was letting on. I turned my head towards the back of the seat, used my chin to move Wolfie under me, and stayed quiet. "Jackson, I've heard you've been stalking my admin," he chuckled, and my ears picked up. "Jackson?" "Yes, and thank you. We are very happy." I snorted. It obviously wasn't my Jackson. No date just yet," he laughed, but it was a bit too fake. "Of course you'll be invited." He was quiet for a long moment and then started talking about some shipment that was apparently delivered to one of his businesses and was damaged. I tuned him out and shifted on the leather seat. I stole a glance at the floor and then realized the thick blanket was gone. Great. Finally, I got bored and sat up. I poked my head over the front seat and Martin turned, smiling at me. I sniffed towards him and he rubbed my head. "Okay. I know I'm not a real dog, but I do see the appeal in that. It felt good." I looked out the front window, able to see a lot more without the thick plates in the way. The road was flanked by trees. Well, so much for the scenery keeping me occupied. I sighed and rested my chin on the back seat. Michaud glanced over me. "How you holding up?" I gave a soft whimper and he nodded. "Don't worry, like your dad said, a few days and then you'll be back and things will be better." My brows lifted and I gave another soft whimper. "Think of it as an adventure," he chuckled, and Martin grinned at me. An adventure, I thought. Was he serious? My dad and my pack were at each other's throats, pardon the pun, and I was supposed to have fun with this? I blinked. Well, I guess I could try, depending on where they were taking me. I was stuck after all. Might as well find something to pass the time. I turned back and snorted. Jonathan had the phone to his ear again. I hopped off the seat and moved to the side window. Not that I wanted to see the endless rows of trees, but just for something to do. Then my stomach growled. I looked down at it and it grumbled again. Great. Not like there was any food in here. I mentally squeezed it, trying to get it to be quiet. "All right, yes. I'll give you a call tomorrow." Again he hung up without saying goodbye. Wasn't that considered rude? I looked at him with my head tilted. "Hungry?" he asked, and my stomach answered for me. He leaned forward and looked out the front of the car. "It'll be about another hour, I'm afraid." I snorted. Oh well, it's not like we could pull up to a drive-through like I saw on TV. It was broad daylight. If we got a flat, we had to call a non-vampire to come change it. I jumped up on the seat with Jonathan and looked over the back seat. Another car just like ours followed. Jonathan turned his head. He said, and then picked up his phone again. I growled softly, jumped down, and paced a bit in the very small space between the seats. This was so annoying. As a vampire, I could sit and be just fine with it. As a wolf, I felt a little caged in. I moved back to the window and sniffed towards it. "Take the next exit," Jonathan called out to Michael, and I turned. "Are we there already?" I asked, hopeful. He shook his head. No, but we're going to get you some food. How? It's daylight outside. Yes, but there are 2 werewolves in the other car, he stated, gesturing behind us. I barked and he smiled. We pulled off the freeway and I jumped back to look over Michael's shoulder. He followed the directions that Jonathan seemed to be getting from his phone, and my tail slammed back and forth in anticipation. I saw several buildings then. They were tall and covered in lights like the city ones, all with huge signs that announced what they were. There were 2 gas stations, which I found odd. Something small, and then I smiled. Food. We pulled into one of the parking lots, and I realized I had only seen these places on TV. When I traveled with my dad, it was always at night, and we never went into small areas that were usually only inhabited by humans. I got excited, being somewhere new, and paced back and forth across the seat. The other car pulled up next to us, and a man got out and ran into the building that had pictures of food plastered all over its large windows. My mouth was watering now, and I stared at the door he went in. Another car pulled into the lot and parked on the other side of us. Its doors opened, and I turned and moved to the other window to watch. A man got out of the driver's door, which was closest to us. He was talking into his cell phone. I watched him pause and give our dark car a thorough inspection. He even bent down a bit and peered towards the back window. I moved closer, watching his face with growing curiosity. His mouth moved as he talked on his phone, and finally he stood up and walked towards the building. I turned, jumped on the back seat, and watched him. Is that a human? I thought. Jonathan nodded, and I continued to watch him until he disappeared through the doors. I hadn't been able to smell him, but I found myself fascinated. Once he was out of sight, I jumped down and tried to look out the other window. Our other car was parked close and blocked the rest of the parking lot. I quickly jumped back up on the seat and watched out the back. I saw a man and a woman walk towards the building, and I drew in a deep breath. But I couldn't get their scent from here. I'm not freaking out, I thought, both amazed and confused by that. I had always had a significant problem with humans. Not a personality clash. They seemed like a decent race to me. But their smell sent all my hormones raging, and it usually wasn't pretty. When I saw the werewolf come back out, I barked and then jumped down to the floor. The humans quickly forgotten. My tongue came out, and I think I actually drooled as I eyed several large bags in his arms. Then he moved to the back of our SUV, and Jonathan hit a button, causing a thick black screen to slide up behind him. He said something into his phone, and I heard the back of the car open, and I yelped. I jumped on Jonathan's seat and threw myself over him, knocking him to the seat. He grunted hard, and I laid over the top of him, thinking I was somehow protecting him. I waited until I heard the back slam shut, and then I half crawled, half slid off, and sat on the floor. He sat up, ran his hands through his hair, and looked at me. Do you mind telling me what that was all about? He asked slowly, straightening his shirt. I thought the light might come in. I see, he said, then chuckled. So you were going to save me? I opened my mouth and then huffed. Well, yeah. He smiled as he pushed a button and the screen slid back down. I'm very grateful for that, but this screen is made to keep the light out. Yeah, well, you're welcome, I growled. Oh, I'm very impressed and touched, he grinned, then turned and got up on his knees. Just then the smell hit me. Food, I thought, and jumped on the seat with him. He was reaching into the back cargo area, but I couldn't wait. I jumped up and over the seat, landed on one of my suitcases, slid, then jumped up to follow the odd smell. I found the bags and sniffed at them, then licked the outside. Dang, I really needed some thumbs. Jonathan chuckled. Bring 'em here. I snatched 2 bags in my teeth and walked over to the seat. He took them from me, and I went for the other one. I can't get that cup, I stated, and he had to half crawl back to pick it up. I jumped back over, and Michael pulled out. I felt a little silly, but I sat on the floor, my tail slamming against the other seat hard as I watched him open the first bag. He pulled out an odd-shaped thing wrapped in paper. I tilted my head. Then he peeled back the paper, and I lunged and snatched the hamburger out of his hand before he could even extend it all the way. He laughed and reached in for another one as I swallowed the first one almost whole. I flinched as the taste hit the back of my throat. Jonathan frowned and opened the other one. This time I leaned forward and sniffed it. What is that? I asked, smacking my lips to get the odd taste out of my mouth. It's a hamburger, he smiled, and I snorted. There was something funny about it, I thought. He pulled the top bun off, and I looked. What is that? He picked up the red round thing. This? I inhaled and then gave it a small lick, shivered, then shook myself. He laughed. Okay, so you don't like tomatoes. He shrugged as he dropped the odd-tasting thing in the bag. He pulled the bun back and held it out. He put the bun back and held it out. This time I took it in my teeth and then dropped it on the floor where I took a careful bite. It still tasted a little strange, but was better without that tomato thing on it. This time it took 3 bites to disappear. How do you know so much about food? I asked, licking my lips to get the food off. I work in the city, Raina. I deal with all types of races in my work. The clubs serve food, and I have to know what people like to eat. Even humans? I asked, the awe passing over in my thoughts. He nodded. Even humans. Wow, I never knew that. I glanced out the window, suddenly feeling small and very naive. Pets? He shook his head. I have no tolerance for that fad, he stated, and I was glad we had the same value system there. I have human nights at 2 of my clubs, and they are also opened as restaurants during the day for a mixed crowd. I was floored. There was so much I had never experienced. Between my odd condition limits and my dad's place in the hierarchy of vampires, I had seen so little, really. My dad had taken me all over the world. I had visited all the famous and important places. I had swam in nearly every ocean and walked the streets of villages thought lost long ago by humans. But I had never walked down a city street or sat in a room without a wall of guards to protect me. Nothing in my life was ever really spontaneous. It had to be planned, timed by the limitations life had decided to inflict on me. It had never really mattered before. My dad was awesome and always went out of his way to fill my life with happiness. But I also knew very little about the life that buzzed all around me, that I had nearly forgotten it even existed outside of television. Do you have any human friends? I asked, taking the next burger after he removed that slimy thing. Acquaintances, he replied, taking the lid off the cup and holding it out to me. Mostly business, but there are 2 that I have met with otherwise. I leaned over the cup that he held out and lapped up the water. Do they know? One nice thing about this type of conversation, I could eat and talk at the same time. He nodded, not outright, but the fact that I only meet with them at night, turning down dinners, not even a drink, there comes a point where you can see the question in their eyes. Would you tell them? He shrugged, ignoring the water that sloshed onto his hand. Most likely not. There are very few that know. To them, business is business, and they keep it quiet. Humans are funny sometimes. Alone, they can be reasoned with and understand, But in a crowd, fear runs deep in them when they don't understand something. History is proof enough of that. He pulled another hamburger out, and I ate this one slower. My stomach was not yelling now, and these things tasted like grease and had some stuff smeared on it so much stuff smeared on it that you could barely taste the meat, if it really was meat. I tried not to shiver at the thought. I have never really met one, I stated as he put the lid back on the cup. I have an issue with their scent, I snorted, so I have to stay away. He nodded. I know. Don't worry, you won't run into any. I sighed, licking my muzzle clean. It really sucks being me sometimes. Now I know that sounded like a one-person pity party, but my life had more limitations than any race. Yes, I was feeling sorry for myself and deprived. Who wouldn't in my situation? I know it's been hard for you, he stated softly, sadness moving in his eyes. You have had to live in a very sheltered life. With your dad's rules and your body's uniqueness, you are an amazing female for being so strong. Strong? I barked. There's nothing strong about it. He sat back in his seat. Really, I've heard of many that were born with less limits than you, and they went mad. I licked the condensation off the plastic cup, and he lifted the lid again. When I couldn't get any more out because of my muzzle, I jumped up on the seat next to him. So, where am I going? To my place, he smiled, those gorgeous gray eyes making my heart jump. I barked. Seriously? Yep, you get to see the Jonathan Hilver bachelor pad firsthand. I blinked several times, still in shock. My dad knows? He laughed and nodded. It was his idea. Wow. I glanced towards the front of the car. We should be there in less than an hour. My dad is going to let me stay at your place? I asked, still in awe of it. My dad took the role of protective father to the extreme. Along with 4 guards and a case of security equipment, he chuckled. Ah, I knew there was a catch. I looked up at Michael's reflection in the rear-view mirror. He was chuckling. I barked playfully at him, and he shook his head. I thought bachelor pads were small. How are we all going to fit? Who told you that? Nobody, I guess. Well, they're always small on TV. I left out the part about them being dirty and smelly, too. No matter what, I couldn't see Jonathan as a slob. That's TV, he grinned. My loft is the entire top floor of a building. When my brows lifted, he nodded. I have 3 guest rooms as well. Really? He winked. And a kitchen. My head tilted. What do you have a kitchen for? Why do you have one? He asked playfully. Good point. Seems I wasn't the only one that had friends that liked to eat food. He smiled and leaned back. I stood on the floor and watched the scenery change. There weren't as many trees now. Large and small buildings popped up more often, and suddenly my stomach started to churn. Oh, that didn't feel so good. Stop looking outside, Jonathan said quietly. Lay down and just close your eyes. My stomach swirled again and my mouth watered, but not in a good way. What's happening? I moaned. Greasy food and staring out the window. Motion sickness, he stated as I laid down on the floor. Less than an hour? He nodded, frowning. Yes, if you need to stop before that, let me know. We'll figure something out. 10 minutes later, we were pulling off the road. I jumped into the cargo area, and Jonathan covered me with a special blanket meant to keep any sunlight out. We had backed into an old abandoned building, but he wasn't taking any chances. He watched me as he slid the shield up. Then the werewolves from the other car opened the back and helped me out, making sure to keep me covered. My stomach was making a very loud ugly noise now. I trotted over behind some barrels and had to get rid of those hamburgers. That was another experience I had never had and hoped to never repeat. My body knew what to do, but my mind freaked as my stomach was squeezed so tightly, and then I nearly choked a few times. Finally I stood, my front paws spread wide, panting hard, my fur a little damp. One of the men brought over a metal container with water in it. Just take a few sips. It will help. I stumbled over, my muscles weak, and lapped up a few mouthfuls. It did help. A bit. Finally I shook myself hard, teetering as I did. I was suddenly very tired, and I laid down right there on the dusty cement floor. "Let's get you back in the car," one said, his voice soft and caring. "Then you can sleep." The car? Was he serious? No part of me wanted to go back in there right now. I closed my eyes. They lifted me up and I grunted. The sun blanket was back over me. When they laid me in the back of the car, one wolf leaned in. "As soon as you get up there, try to sleep. It will help." I gave a soft whimper of thanks and the door closed. Jonathan slid down the divider and I stumbled over the things in the back and scrambled over the seat. My stomach was empty, cramping, and my throat was raw, the sour taste pushing away any thoughts of food. He watched me lay down on the floor. I reached up and pulled Wolfie down with me, then lowered my head and closed my eyes. Chapter 6. I woke up to voices. My ears moved before my eyes opened. Jonathan looked down at me, a soft smile on his face. "We're here." I lifted my head and then yawned. He stepped out of the car and turned, waiting for me. My eyes moved past him and I sniffed, smelling cement, oil, car fumes, and too many other things to sort out so soon after waking up. I stood slowly, stretched, shook myself hard, then jumped out of the car. Michaud was standing with Jonathan now. I turned and saw the two werewolves pulling my things out of the back. Jonathan picked up the large duffel bag and then turned. I glanced up at Michaud and then trotted after him. My head turned back and forth as we walked. This garage was about the same size as the one at the manor, but it was bare. The walls and floors were cement. Aside from soft lights on the poles, there wasn't anything remarkable about it. I did notice a few other cars parked to the side, ones I didn't recognize. I suddenly had the urge to go check them out, but Jonathan called my name and I followed. We went up onto a platform and he hit a button. It replied with a quiet ding. I heard the humming of the elevator and watched as the doors finally opened. It was a bit nicer inside, the walls covered in a soft blue fabric with gold accents. I looked up at the soft dome light and sneezed. Michael was in with us, carrying my two bags. It felt odd to be in a moving elevator on 4 legs. I had ridden in them plenty of times on 2, but I could feel the vibrations under my paws and look down at the carpet. Finally, another soft ding and the doors opened again. Jonathan walked down the hall and then pushed another button. Where exactly was this loft? When we got inside this one, Jonathan took out his keys and put an odd-shaped one in a hole on the panel. He turned it, pushed another button, and then pulled it out. This time, when the doors opened, I stood as he stepped out. This was his loft. The elevator opened right into what looked like a living room. I stepped out as Michael prompted me with his leg. It wasn't what I expected. In fact, it looked like something out of a magazine. You could see almost the entire living space, or so it seemed. The sitting area was done in earth tones with soft red, orange, and cream accents. The long couch was curved, and there was a long stand in front of it, dark brown and empty on top. The brown and cream rug was thick and felt good under my paws. I looked over and saw the kitchen. It was right off the sitting room, and everything there was soft blacks and tarnished silver with splashes of red. The cupboards had a dimmed light coming out from under them, and I looked at the silver surfaces and tilted my head in wonder. Wolves were really only affected by pure silver, and you could hardly make a stove or a refrigerator out of that. The kitchen was on the left. The entire right wall was covered in heavy drapes that went from the high ceiling completely to the floor. They were a soft cream color with darker brown lines. I moved to the other side of the living room and then turned when Jonathan chuckled. He pointed to a room, and the guards headed that way with my things. Then he looked down at me. "They are specially made and don't let any light in," he explained. "But they're light-colored," I thought. He nodded. "There's a backing on them that prevents any real light from coming through. There are also sliding panels behind them. Not as fancy as the Manor's shields, but they're safe." My brows knitted and he chuckled. "Let me show you where your room is, then I'll give you the tour." He walked off and I followed, my head and eyes moving everywhere. There was a large wall that I thought was the end of the space, but we walked around it and were in a hallway. Michael and the wolf guards were just stepping out of one of the doorways. Jonathan gestured towards it. "Not as nice as you deserve, but—" I stepped in. It was a decent-sized room, even though it was 1/4 the size of mine. There was a large 4-poster bed on the right, with heavy curtains tied to the posts. The bedding was caramel-colored, and the pillows were creams and darker browns. The floor was wood, but there were 2 very thick rugs that took up most of it, both soft brown with flecks of black. I walked over and sniffed the bed, then saw another door and moved to it. "That's the closet," he stated, opening it. I saw my suitcases on the floor in there and looked up. It was a small walk-in closet, but why would a guest need anything more? There was also a dresser, 2 nightstands, and a soft chair in the corner. Jonathan opened another door and I moved towards it. "Your own private bathroom." It was small too, but had a beautiful shower that was tiled in soft browns. The sink was actually a large bowl of swirling colors set on top of a black lacquer counter. "Classy," I stated, and he chuckled. I stole a glance at the toilet and then quickly stepped out. I hadn't thought about that. As a wolf, I did eat food, and there were certain physical requirements that came along with that. At the manor, my dad had an area for me. Here, I looked around. "Yeah, about that," Jonathan stated, and I turned away from him. This was just too embarrassing. "You'll have to let one of us know when you need to," he shrugged. "Unless you know how to use—" I trotted out of the room without looking back. Dignity was something else I was losing more and more of these days. I followed Michael's voice to another room. It was smaller than mine, but nice. He was going through his own duffel bag, and he turned to smile at me. I bet he misses Paige, I thought, my head dropping a little. I had messed up so many things. "I know that look," my guard smiled. "Things will work out." I noticed he didn't say the usual "this isn't your fault," but why would he? This was my fault. Completely and utterly my fault. Jonathan stepped up to the doorway, his phone to his ear. By what he was saying, I assumed he was talking to my dad and letting him know we were here. One of the wolves came out of the other room, and I trotted over to it. Looks pretty much like Michael's, except the colors were blues and creams. Not bad. Jonathan chuckled, and then he turned. "Would you like to see my room now?" He was putting the phone back in his pocket when I barked. He turned and headed further down the hall. The hall turned to the left at the far end, and there was a set of double doors. He opened them and then stepped back. I looked back down the hall. So the wall, that appeared to be the end of the loft, separated all this from the living area. I heard Jonathan's footsteps and turned, following him in. His room was almost as big as mine back home, only his made mine look like a little girl's room. The colors were again earth tones, but everything was sleek and classy. His bed had the posters around it that held blackout curtains we vampires needed, just in case. But the large bed was on a black base, and the soft brown and darker brown linings were striking. The pillows all had covers on them that either matched the bedding or held soft variations with splashes of other colors. I did smile when I noticed the one soft green pillow that seemed very out of place. My pillow. Jonathan winked at me, and I continued my visual inspection. There was a soft glow around the ceiling, and I realized there was hidden track lighting behind a faux border. There was a low table at the foot of his bed, and, like the one in the living room, it had nothing on it. I tilted my head, and he smiled. Then he walked to the side of his bed and pushed a button on his nightstand. I stepped back as a very faint whirring sound came from the table, and then stepped back up as something started to come out of the top. A TV screen, as long as the table, slid up almost silently. I walked to where he stood and looked at the screen. That is very cool, I thought. I'm glad you approve, he chuckled. I didn't sniff around his room, but I did walk around and look at everything. It was so neat in here. No clothes on the floor, the bed was perfectly made, and there wasn't a single thing out of place. It made me wonder just what he thought of me. I have a cleaning lady, he explained. She hasn't had much to do lately. Michaud cleared his throat, and we both turned. Mind showing me the cameras to the garage and the security for the elevator? Right, Jonathan stated and looked at me quickly. That is my closet, he said, pointing to a door. The other is my bathroom. My study is at the end of the hall. Look around all you want. He smiled at me and then walked out of the room. I sat and sighed. So, this was the mysterious bachelor pad. It was rather disappointing. Not a thing out of place. Nice and roomy, classy. No mysterious smells. What fun is that? I quickly got up and walked out into the hall. I looked into the rooms again as I went back. Seems the wolves were sharing one room, as I saw a pull-out bed off to the side. Then I noticed the same thing in Michael's room and huffed. Why couldn't they split the rooms? Since two would be on duty while two slept. I growled and continued back into the living room. Jonathan and the 4 guards were standing by a panel on the wall. I ignored them and trotted towards the kitchen. I had lost what food I had eaten, and now I was hungry again. I sniffed around. Even the floors were spotless. Suddenly, I became aware of my steps. I looked behind me to make sure I wasn't tracking anything on the fancy tile. There was a buzzing sound, and I looked up at the men. Jonathan looked back at me. Just more supplies, he explained. Food? He chuckled. No, but that will be here soon. Michael stepped up in front of the elevator doors, and Martin stood with him side to side, both watching a small screen to the side of it. Jonathan turned and walked over to me. Security stuff that Michael had sent over. Oh, sorry. Sorry? Having your nice apartment turned into a mini manor. He laughed. This place could use the excitement. Then he looked at the fridge. It's completely empty, I'm afraid, but I called in an order and it should be here soon. We both turned as the elevator opened and Michael and Martin stepped inside. I watched them go through the boxes before they started to lift them and bring them in. So paranoid, I huffed. Jonathan knelt down. So, what would you like to do? I looked around and he shrugged. I'm sorry that this place doesn't have what the manor has. I'm hardly ever here. I like it. It's nice. He grinned. Well, we're limited to watching TV, or I could get online and we could look at houses. My ears perked up on that and he nodded. Okay then. Have a seat in the living room and I'll grab the laptop. When he came back, I was sitting on the rug. He plopped down on the couch and patted the seat next to him. I don't want to ruin your nice furniture, I thought. He raised his brows. Raina, we're a couple now. This might as well be your place too. I looked around, feeling my skin prickle from the thought. All the more reason not to ruin it. He laughed. Come on. I glanced at the soft leather couch and thought about my claws and fur and shook my head. Jonathan frowned. Raina, this is your home too now. Well, your second home. I want you to be comfortable. When I still refused, he slid to the floor and leaned back against the couch. He shook his head at me and opened the laptop. When it sprang to life, I sat next to him and we both ignored the 4 guards as they busied themselves setting up whatever it was they were setting up. Jonathan went to one site and we looked through a list of homes. There was one that caught my eye and I barked. He moved his finger down the list until I barked again. Then he smiled and clicked on it. It was a much smaller version of the manor, sort of. Let's see. 6 guest bedrooms, 2 that are suites. He looked at me and smiled. Master suite is 3 rooms, sleeping, sitting, and bath. Bathroom has a jacuzzi tub and a walk-in shower for 2. Another look at me and I huffed but leaned in for a closer look. You definitely have high blood taste, he chuckled. What does that mean? I asked without anger. It was a term I hadn't heard before. Well, it means that you're used to very nice things, he tried. I'm a snob? No, he laughed. It means you have class. I shook my head and he nodded. Yes, you, Raina Blvd, have high-class taste. Then he pointed to the screen. This house sits atop 10.5 acres. 0.75 are manicured, and the rest is wooded area that branched off to a small forest. My brows rose. Are you joking? He shook his head, a little in awe. It's like somebody created a small replica of the manor. He went on to read more, out loud. How much does it cost? I finally asked. Jonathan smiled. You can't see the numbers either? I gave a low growl. I can see things are there, but I can't decipher them. Ah, well, it's pretty pricey, he stated, clicking on another screen. Michaud walked over, glanced at the screen, then at Jonathan. The wolf guards are heading out to check things outside. We both nodded, and then I turned back. What about the house you showed me before? It was nice. I felt bad about the mini manor. I was sure it cost a small fortune, and Jonathan was not my dad. Someone bought it a few days ago, he stated, still flipping through pictures of the manor. The firehouse was nice, I put in, and he glanced up at me. Raina, I'm not a pauper, you know. What? I know. I'm just saying. What would we need with a big house? It'll just be the 2 of us anyhow. Try the 2 of us, your guards, and some house help. My guards, I barked. He nodded and clicked on something else on the site. Then his smile slipped a little. It's 3 hours outside of town. Well, see, it's not for us, I tried, then turned when the panel buzzed again. That must be your food, he said, then sat the computer on the couch and stood up. This time I was interested in that elevator. Michael was at the panel and frowning. "There are 3 delivery people," he stated, his jaw tight. Jonathan nodded. "I don't have any food here, so I ordered quite a bit." Michael's frown deepened and he pushed the button. "Place the inventory in the elevator," he stated in a harsh voice. The face on the screen crunched in confusion, and Michael stabbed the button again. "Place the groceries in the elevator. It comes up, you don't." Wow. I was surprised I didn't throw the goods in and run. Michael's voice could scare me when he was irritated. "Sir?" came a man's voice, his eyes moving towards one of the people with him. Jonathan shook his head and Michael looked at him. "Are they expecting payment?" "Just a tip," he chuckled. "I'll go down there." Michael gave a sharp nod and pushed another button that opened the doors. Martin stepped in with him and Jonathan gave me a quick wave as the doors closed. "Seriously? All this over some groceries?" I thought. My guard looked down at me. "You're lucky you're getting off this easy, security-wise." His face softened then, and I tilted my head. "You can hear me?" He blinked a few times, and then I barked. "If you're wondering if I can hear you, no, I can't," he replied. "Some things are just obvious." I barked at him playfully, and he turned back to the screen, now set up on a small table, and watched Jonathan and Martin in the elevator. I turned and trotted back towards the computer on the couch, growling again at my lack of thumbs. I squinted at the screen. I never did understand why I couldn't read fully when shifted. The picture of the mini manor was still there, though. I growled at it and reached my paw up. I meant to simply try to get the picture to go away, but whatever I hit made the whole screen go blank. "Uh-oh," I whimpered and sniffed at it. When the doors opened again, Jonathan and Martin stepped off, their arms filled with bags. I sniffed the air and trotted over. Michael stepped in front of them, and Jonathan waited while his bags were inspected. I followed Jonathan to the kitchen and watched him pull the food out. There was a lot of brown wrap packages and others in clear wrap that was irritating because I couldn't smell the contents very well. Martin set the other bags on the counter and moved to the elevator to get more. Michael was bent over them, looking through them as if they still might have missed something. Just what exactly did he think he might find? "This is all for me?" I asked as he moved to the refrigerator and started to stock it. "You and 2 wolf guards," he smiled back at me. "Oh yeah, them. It's okay. I could share." My stomach made a loud noise and he took one of the brown packages and moved to the sink. He placed it in there and then got out a plate out of the cupboard. He washed the meat and then lowered it down to me. I sniffed it and then consumed it while he was putting more things away. He found a large bowl, filled it with water, and sat that down with my food. I tried not feeling like a pet dog at this point, but it was hard. When I finished 2 of the delicious pieces and half the water, he smiled at me. "One good thing about you eating it raw, you aren't subject to my lack of cooking skills. The guards won't be so lucky." I barked and then looked around. "I really want to change. This is so humiliating." "Not just yet. Maybe tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" "Raina, those tears." Then he frowned. "Can you stay shifted that long?" He mumbled something under his breath. "I didn't think about that." "I don't know," I stated truthfully, "but I'm healing fast. It already itches," I tried. He pulled out his phone and went to hit a button. He paused before he pushed it, then finally dialed. "Jack?" That was the name of one of the wolf guards. David was the other one. How long do you think she can stay shifted? He asked, and I sat down and looked up at him, waiting. I see. Well, do you think she can make it another day? I could hear noise through the phone, but I couldn't make out the words. That was irritating. When he hung up, he looked down at me. We'll see how it goes. He says wares can stay shifted as long as a week, but they have to work up to that. What if I shift back for just a while? I tried as he finished putting the food away. I could really use a nice hot shower right about now. Let's wait a few more hours and go from there. Fine, I snorted, then jumped as another phone rang. This one sounded different somehow, and I watched him walk over and pick up a phone from the wall. Michaud was watching him, and I had to laugh. Did he think someone was going to climb through the phone? I heard Jonathan say hello. Then he paused and said hello again. He looked at the phone. Blocked number, he stated, then put it back to his ear and said hello again. He went to hang it up, but Michael took it and listened. Could just be a wrong number, Jonathan tried, smiling at me. Michael pulled his own phone out, hung up the house phone, and moved over to a laptop he had set up on a small table. Man, the humans would love to have them working for them. If they knew he even existed, I teased. Jonathan nodded, but I saw the glimmer of worry in his eyes. Did I really ruin everything so quickly? Now I was here, in his home, and things were happening. This was probably his sanctuary, a place where he came to relax and unwind. Now, because of me, his space was invaded, and people were calling and hanging up. I have a tracer on it, Michael stated, and Jonathan shook his head. You're fast. Michael only nodded, still talking into his cell phone. I walked out of the kitchen and went and laid on the rug by the couch. The guilt and weight of all that was happening was sneaking back in. My pack and my dad were standing off, and I had been shipped away while they did. I remembered the look on my dad's face when he faced off with Ryan and Poulsen. All because I had to go and sneak out to try to get Phil to stop being mad at me. I closed my eyes. Why were they keeping me out of Poulsen then? If Phil didn't hate me, what was so wrong that they wouldn't even let me talk to him? Jonathan walked over and I looked up. He picked up the computer and frowned. Oh yeah, about that. My fault too, I thought, in a low, defeated voice. Two? He asked, setting the computer back on the couch and sliding back down to the floor with me. When I didn't respond, he shook his head, crossing his ankles. Raina, this is not happening because of you. My head shot up. It's exactly happening because of me. I shook my head. If I hadn't been so utterly stupid, everything would be the same as it was. His phone rang again. This time it was his cell phone. He looked at me and then pulled it out. I saw his face tighten when he glanced at the screen, and that got my attention. It rang again, and I tilted my head. Is it Track? His eyes answered for him, and I growled, Well, aren't you going to answer it? Michael had walked over, and I looked at him. Well? I snapped at Jonathan, and he pushed the button and put the phone to his ear. I growled deeply and snorted when Michael stayed where he was. Hello? Jonathan stated, and then nodded. Yes, she's fine. There was a hint of anger in his words, and I sat down hard. I didn't like this at all. They had been getting along, well, better, and now they were back to this. She can't talk right now. She is still shifted. Jonathan looked at me, and I barked to say hello in my own way. I wanted to talk to him badly. I wanted to know what was going on and to try to find a way to fix this. Jonathan's brows knitted. I don't think that would be a good idea, Track. What? I yelped. What is he saying? I moved closer, but Jonathan shook his head. She's safe, and that's what's important. I think you'd agree. My head lowered as I heard the animosity in my boyfriend's voice. I understand this was only to give her space while Ryan and her father... Yes, I know. Jonathan ran a hand through his hair, the same thing my dad did when he was stressed or angry. I barked again. I'm okay, Track, I thought. I'm so sorry, and I will find a way to fix this. Jonathan looked up at me. I growled, then barked a few more times, trying to get my thoughts across that way. Finally, Jonathan held out the phone, his lips tight. Then he hit another button, and I heard Track. Ray? I barked again, excitedly. Look, I don't want you to worry, even though I know you will anyhow. Another bark from me. This was so completely frustrating. Things are pretty weird here right now, but Ryan has put in another call to your dad, and they're going to talk tomorrow. Tomorrow? I barked. Why not now? I agree. This has all gotten way out of hand. Suddenly, Track's voice became muffled, like he put his hand over the phone and was talking to someone else. Then he was back. I miss you, Wolf Girl. We all do. I barked in a high-pitched voice that said I missed him too. There was a pause. Don't let them turn you into a vampire, he chuckled at the end, but I heard the sadness in his voice. My chest tightened and my throat did as well. I wanted my life back, all of it. I wanted my best friend more than just about anything. Hearing his voice and the pain in it was so hard. Then I felt a tingle and looked down. Oh no! Jonathan sat up. We have to go, he said quickly and hit the button. He tossed the phone on the couch and ignored it when it started to ring again. A shift? I nodded, and he shook his head. You have to hold it off, he whispered, trying to keep his voice calming. I closed my eyes and forced it to slow, but Track's voice crept into my mind, and I ached for him and the pack. I needed their comfort. I needed things back how they were. I needed so many things, and I had no control over any of it. I started to pant from the stress of the battle as Jonathan whispered encouragement to me. Didn't he realize that only made it worse? I heard his phone ring again, and Track's face popped into my mind. I saw him laughing, smiling, and then I saw him when he last left the manor. I let out a whimper, and then the pain hit. I heard Jonathan yelling something about getting a bag, and then I threw my head back and howled. The shift was extremely painful this time. There were so many emotions swimming through me that I couldn't step outside of myself. It crashed around me, tearing at my heart as well as my limbs. Death, true death, seemed only inches away at one point, and I hoped for it. Fire seared through my mind and body at the same time, followed by a cold that made the fire seem bearable. When the shift was finally over, I laid on the floor, covered in a blanket, and sobbed. Part of it was for all that happened, and finally being able to shed tears for it. The rest was for the pure agony that my body had just gone through. My body shook from the pain, and even my hair hurt. My mind still remembered the torture, and the stinging from my neck injury was nothing compared to the rest of me. Jonathan was laying next to me now, stroking my hair and talking softly to me. I ignored him, keeping my face buried in my hands. When I finally couldn't cry anymore, I just laid there, hidden in my own pain and anger. I felt so incredibly guilty for everything that had happened. I was furious with myself, but I couldn't get past the pain enough to actually be mad. Finally, I felt a cool cloth on my cheek, and I turned to the relief. Jonathan rubbed it softly over my face, and I kept my eyes closed. Then I felt something at my neck, and I flinched. "I have to fix the bandage," came his whisper. I gave a small nod and laid still, eyes still closed. I flinched and even cried out a few times as he took the wolf-sized bandages off. The cut had opened in a few places, and the gauze pulled as he carefully removed it. His voice caught as he tried to soothe me. I knew it couldn't be pretty. Then I felt coldness on the wound, and he explained that he was applying a salve. The coolness actually felt good, and it did seem to help with the slight pain. Then he wrapped it again. Great. A gauze choker. How chic. Finally, I sensed him laying down next to me, and I slowly opened my eyes. When I saw the pain in his, I closed them again. I couldn't stand looking at him now, knowing it was my own fault that he was not smiling. Again. I was a horrible vampire and a worse werewolf. There were so many other ways I could have handled that night, but instead I did the dumbest thing possible and destroyed what so many had worked hard for. "Raina, please, I just want to be alone right now." "Then let's get you at least into your room." My brows rose. Oh yeah, I was laying naked on his living room floor. If there was any dignity left in me, I wasn't sure where it was hiding. I slowly opened my eyes, and this time he smiled at me. As I sat up, he pulled the blanket around me, and I slowly got to my feet. My neck did hurt a little, but not much. I didn't turn and say anything to Michaud or whoever else was standing there. The self-hatred and self-pity were too busy working through me for me to care about anything else. Jonathan led me down the hallway into my room. He sat me on the bed, and I let my eyes glaze over as he rummaged through my bags. When he walked over with my pajamas, I slowly took them. "I can dress myself," I whispered, then stood and walked into the bathroom. When I came out, he was sitting on the edge of the bed, looking at me carefully. I laid the blanket on the chair, and he stood so I can get under the covers. The bed smelt differently. It didn't smell like home. It was clean and fresh, but unfamiliar. I laid down on the strange pillow and stared up at the soft beige ceiling. Jonathan's face appeared in front of me as he leaned over. "Tell me what you're thinking," he whispered with a plea in his voice. "Just trying to remember the last time I slept away from home," I stated, and that was actually the truth. I just left out all the other stuff. He smiled. "Well, soon enough we'll be living in our own place." I nodded mechanically, and he frowned. "Raina, I don't like seeing you like this." I blinked up at him, then gave him a soft smile. "I'm sorry. You are wonderful for doing all of this for me. I guess I'm more of a shut-in than I thought." I forced the smile into my eyes, and he chuckled. Then he lifted Wolfie. "I am going to lay with you tonight, but I thought we could make him a spot on that chair over there," he stated, motioning to the one I had put the blanket on. "You're sleeping in here with me?" I whispered. "All night?" When he nodded, I smiled, and he kissed the tip of my nose. "I do have to go change first, if you don't mind," he stated. I grinned. "Do you actually have pajamas?" He shrugged playfully. "What would you say if I said no?" My eyes widened, and he laughed. "I have 'em." He kissed my lips then. "I'll go change and be right back." Then he handed me Wolfie. "You, my little stuffed rival, have until I get back. Then it's to the chair with you." He winked at me and then stood. As soon as he walked out, my eyes watered. I didn't want to be here. No matter how wonderful it was going to be laying in Jonathan's arms all night, I wanted to be home. I wanted everything between my dad and my pack to be normal. A tear slid down my cheek, and I lifted Wolfie and inhaled slowly. Track scent filled me, and more tears ran down. That's where I'm going to stop.